This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. My guest is Ms. Celeste Mohammed. She's an emerging writer and author who's just been picking up prize after prize and awards in the last few years. She won the Bocas Lit Fest for Caribbean literature in 2022. She was only the second author to get this prize with their first publication. Before that, she won the John D. Gardner Memorial Prize for Fiction in 2017, as well as the Penn Robert J. Dow Short Story Prize for Fiction in 2018. In 2019, she won the Virginia Woolf Award for Short Story Fiction. About the novel, which won the Bocas Lit Fest Prize last year, Ms. Mohammed said her goal was to dispel the myths about island life and island people. The book is entitled Pleasant View. What's more, Ms. Mohammed gave up a successful career as a lawyer to focus on bringing to life the muse inside of her. She's our guest for this edition of 10 Questions. Good to see you.
Hello, good morning. Good to be here.
All right, so I wanted to ask the question, the original question. That was you consider that to be awesome going thus far, right?
I'm grateful. Yes, it's been good. It's been a good run.
All right, when you say Pleasantville was named as the most outstanding piece of work, you felt like it was, or when it was named that way, you felt like it was a climax of a journey that was fraught with challenges and rejection. Can we discuss some of those challenges and feelings of rejection?
Sure. For anybody, walking away from a profession that they've put a lot into and going into a new profession, you want to be successful and you want to be successful as soon as possible. But for me, it took a while. I think Pleasant View was rejected something like 30 times between my agent sending it out and me sending it out. I think it was rejected something like 30 times. And every time, of course, it would hurt to be told, we love it, but no. So that there was a lot of rejection involved and a lot of self-doubt and wondering if I had thrown away a perfectly good career for nothing.
Yeah, and what kept you going? What did you rely on to keep going?
I just felt deep down that the book just needed a chance, that it just needed the right person to just give it a chance to get out into the world. And once it did, I felt readers, particularly Caribbean readers, would embrace it and see it for what it is, an authentic portrayal of contemporary Trinidad.
Yeah. So you just went with your gut. You held on to your gut and you stuck it out.
Yes, I stuck it out.
So you decided to give up being a lawyer, going to work every day, doing that, because writing was your first love. When did that moment come to you that, look, I'm going to make this switch, come hell or high water?
I would say that it was a gradual decline in my level of satisfaction with the practice of law, and a gradual sort of coming to understand that law, I was trying to make law something that it could never be. I thought that I could change the world. I thought that all the writing involved in law would somehow, satisfy this need to write. And obviously, as I matured in the profession, I realized that's not true. And I had my aha moment. I would say it's always a joke I tell people. I was sitting in a meeting that had been going on for 3 hours. I was the corporate secretary and head of legal of a firm, a company, and I was sitting in that meeting for 3 hours, and it just dawned on me that I cannot do this with my life anymore. I can't sit here and argue about things that just are not important to me. So I left that meeting and I went home and I told my spouse, I need a break.
Yeah, and you said that's what led you to saying that you felt that law was not soul-giving and not soul-fulfilling, such as a profession, when it is about righting wrongs, about avoiding rule by might. That's my assertion there. Those are not what the strengths of it are, righting wrongs, about avoiding rule by might and by force and working against arbitrariness and establishing order, that kind of thing?
I mean, law is yes, as an ideal, we need to have ideals like law and justice and all of those things and to aspire towards. But in reality, the practice of law is much less about achieving those ends. Sometimes it's just about might. And the type of law I was practicing was corporate law and so which is a lot about might and money. And I think any lawyer who you ask, most lawyers I know anyway, don't really feel like at the end of the day that a very soul fulfilled feeling, more like drained at the end of the day. And for some people, it's fine. Some people, they love what they do as lawyers. I would never knock it. I might still dabble in it from time to time, but I could not continue when there was something else more that I wanted to do, and another way I wanted to affect the world.
Yeah, and something that was higher on your bucket list.
Yes.
Yeah. You say your main aim was to dispel the myths about island life and island people, and you described some of them in the interview. Give us a sense of some of the myths and that would have bothered you to the point that you wanted to get at it in this way.
Well, mainly, I mean, my earliest interaction with North America was, I was around 6 years old, I think, when my parents tried to migrate unsuccessfully. And I remember, even then, not being able to go to school for a long time and going through the mall and people coming up and touching my hair and touching my brother's hair and treating us like something different. And then I remember going back after common entrance and leaving a bathroom stall and a lady coming up to me and asking me what I was, like, what are you? And, so there's this, and then I remember, throughout the time traveling to the US and Canada and stuff, and people saying, where are you from? And you say Trinidad, and they're like, oh, that's in Jamaica, right? And just making all kinds of assertions as if the Caribbean is a monolith, which it isn't. There are many different cultures and different flavors here. And we're such a mixed people, And also we aren't, it's not all about sun, sea, sand, have fun, carnival. There's some serious issues alive in the Caribbean that people just don't seem to accept as possible. They just think that we live happy-go-lucky lives, and I think that's a bit insulting.
Yeah, I remember, well, I mean, having lived abroad for some time, I know exactly what you're talking about. I remember being in Toronto one time and walking down the street and there was some fun happening. It was the summer and it was a steel band playing at Toronto-based steel orchestra led by a man called Ian Jones, and there were some people hustling their relatives, say, come, let's go and hear this Jamaican steel band,
Oh my gosh. Yes.
So, yes. Right. How did you? So how you address that in some parts of the book? How do you deal with that?
Well, I'll be honest. The book is a kind of a setup. So I called it Pleasant View, and I decided on a cover that looks like this, simply to sort of hook some people into the notion that they already have in their minds of what the Caribbean is. But then when you open the book and you begin to read, you begin to see that life off the resort is very different. Life for many people in an average town is very different. And that's what I did. I took people behind the scenes and I showed them, these are average lives. It's not what you think, And that was my way of dispelling that myth that we only drink rum and coke and lie down under coconut trees and jump up in steel bands.
Yeah, does it amaze you that in this day and age and this time, there's still people who think like that about us?
I think there are, because as I said, even when I was doing my master's in creative writing not too long ago in Boston, I came up upon that a couple of times. Like, we would have workshops to go through each other's work. And I remember there was this one time this guy had written something. He had written a short story about something happening in corporate America. And I expressed an opinion about how something I said to the effect that, yes, it really does reflect what we know of corporate America. And everybody around the table looked at me like, what do you know? What do you know about business and high finance and what happens in corporate America? And again, I was insulted because you have no idea. You know, Caribbean people among us, we have very sophisticated people, and you know, so I just felt like yes, there are still people walking around who hold a simplistic view of Caribbean life and Caribbean people.
Yeah. What was your determining factor in titling the book Pleasant View? Because I was asking whether or not it's a take on Pleasantville at all in any kind of way and so on.
Well, that was very smart of you to catch on to that, because yes, it's a number of things. When I was little, we did live for a time in Pleasantville, and even back then, as a little girl, it struck me how, you know, we have a tendency in Trinidad, I don't know about the wider Caribbean, of irony. So we have these places that the government sets up, right? Lower income neighborhoods and so. And we always give them these fantastic names. So-and-so Gardens and Pleasant View and this and that, you know, just these luscious names that in no way depict what is actually happening there, you know, on a day-to-day basis. So inspired by that, having lived in Pleasantville, and also when I was doing my law degree in Barbados, the neighborhood was called Pleasant View, where most of the students lived. So combining those two things and wanting to create a bit of irony, I chose that name for the book.
Yeah. And you think it's because in some cases people are aware of the toughness of the neighborhood, so as a means of softening that in the minds of people who would live there and people who would come and visit you, you find a name like that, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny. Years later, I was maybe about 5 years ago, I was speaking to someone who lives in one of those neighborhoods. And at that point, the neighborhood hadn't been given a pretty name. It was just called X number 1, right? Let's call it that, X number 1. I won't say where. And he said to me, he was very proud to say to me that he was showing me a house for sale in there. And he was saying, you know, and the government just decided they're going to make us a gardens. So for him, going from being called X number 1 to being called so-and-so Gardens was an achievement for the community. And I found that to be a little bit sad.
Yeah, there's a whole set of discussion around or writing about the whole question of what's in a name.
Sorry, what's in a name? Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
What would you say are some of the dark sides of Caribbean life that you would have tried to point out and give life to?
Definitely dark sides, because I think geographically we're sort of destined to have dark sides. Yes, it's, you know, beautiful islands or whatever, but when you really look at a map of this hemisphere and you see that the thing connecting South America to North America, I mean, there are only two directions you can go if you want to get north, and that is up the peninsula, Central America, or you go through the islands.
Yes.
And so products and things produced in South America need to move in one of those two directions, yes? Which, of course, gives rise to, and we are the very first island that you have to, you know, land on if you're going up the island chain. And of course, that leads to a dark side and a political and economic dark side and sort of black economy. And the very first story in my book looks at that. It looks at that, the human trafficking element, the trafficking of other things, you know, and the alternative economy that thrives in South Trinidad and all over Trinidad, really, as a result of our being, our geographical position.
Yeah, where we're located, and some people talk about a transshipment point
Yes,
from one
absolutely.
place to the other.
Absolutely.
To what extent these things might feature in other stuff that you may be working on now or you have down on your list as to what to treat with?
Yeah. So this book was very much about, I would say, geographically inspired. That's why, the name of the town is Pleasantville. It's about a town. It's about a place. It's about Trinidad in that way. A microcosm of Trinidad is what this book intends to present. But the book that I'm working on now and almost finished with is a similar structure where it's a novel in stories, a novel put together with a string of stories, but its focus is more on a family. And it's inspired by my own family, my grandmother and her sisters and my mother and all of that. And just some of the trials and prejudices that an Indian woman faces in domestic life and in life in Trinidad, and what it has been like for me to grow up in a home run by Indian women who have faced these challenges, and me observing them, and me at the same time not being an Indian woman. So that's what the book is about, the second book that I'm working on.
Yeah, and well, yeah, I would tell you that I had to come to grow into understanding that somebody with a surname as Muhammad, that means that's Muslim, and
Yes.
other names that you identify as Hindu. So even in there are differences among Indian women, right? And does that mean there are differences in family relations and how people are brought up in a Muslim home as opposed to in an Hindu home? And we won't even go to Presbyterian, which...
Yeah, it does make a difference. I mean, it's so subtle. You would have to be in the culture almost to understand the subtle differences. But it does make a difference, and it makes a difference. It was not until I had my own child, my own daughter, and after some years, I realized, a woman will always try to raise a girl child in her image and likeness, right? And I realized that my mother and my aunts, and they were trying to raise me in their image and likeness. And what they're Indian women trying to raise me, somebody who must go into the world and will never be seen that way. They were trying to raise me to be something that I could never actually be. And, coming to terms with that and kind of understanding certain things and having to forgive certain things, I poured all of that into this new book.
Yeah, this one that is to come out.
Yes.
But if you will, how were those sort of issues resolved in your own home, in growing up with yourself and with your mother and your aunts, presumably?
Yeah. I think for a while, I resolved them via rebellion. But in time, I came to, like I said, I came to understand that they were doing the best they could with what they knew and what they had been taught. And I think ultimately, I was lucky in that further education, the process of going out into the world and living in other places, helped to broaden my mind and deepen my confidence that I could be my own person. I could decide what that means. I didn't have to aspire to some cultural standard.
Yeah, I read a book by the illustrious Dr. Pat Mohammed about negotiating gender issues among Indo-Trinidadian families. I think what you're talking about there speaks to what she dealt with from a sociological point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and she's like her books, they're like what we would say in law. Forgive me, I always still quote legal terms, but we would say she's the locus classicus of what it is to be an Indian woman in Trinidad. And you have to negotiate a number of things. One, in an Indian home, you have to negotiate womanhood, which in itself comes with certain expectations, and how you're perceived within the home, and then how people perceive you on the outside. And if you're mixed like me, there's another element that you also have to negotiate.
And some of those things are illuminated upon in this work in Pleasant View.
Well, a little bit in this book, but more in the second book that I'm finishing up.
You're going into it more deeply there.
Yeah.
You talk about hearing people like Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie addressing the issue of the danger of the single story. You think that is something which affects the view of the Caribbean and its people from other people?
Yes. Yes. A lot of people in the literary world have seen that TED Talk. And it was very insightful in that she pointed out Africa is always perceived in a particular way, as this dark continent. And the photographs and the videos we see support that, poverty and whatever, and ignorance. But, and if you show the same thing over and over again, people begin to accept that is the only truth when it isn't. I mean, the stories that you hear of Africa are not incorrect, but they're incomplete. And it's the same thing. I was listening to her, and I began to realize, but hey, hang on, it's the same thing with the Caribbean, like we said earlier, where if you only ever hear Trinidad voted the happiest country in the world, Trinidad Carnival, Trinidad, dissipation and drunkenness and bacchanal, if that's all you ever hear in popular culture, it's not incorrect, but it's incomplete. Trinidad also has a lot more to offer the world, and I was inspired by that Adichie's talk, and it did inform my book, and it does inform my writing.
Yeah, you think it's a difficult thing for many of us to think, in complexities about who we are, wherever we may be, which part of the globe we are. That question of finding a simple sort of a statement to identify us. And sometimes it's political, sometimes it's cultural, sometimes it's about superiority and inferiority, why some people will hold on to a particular narrative or piece of it as opposed to the other.
Yes, absolutely. That's a very good point. Yeah, people may have reasons why they cling to a particular narrative of Trinidad and of Caribbeanness, and would rather not. And then on the other hand, too, we are also complicit. Most of the economies in the Caribbean are, as you know, tourist-driven. And so we ourselves package and promote a vision of the islands which supports those tourist economies. Yeah. So we are complicit in that.
But you see signs at all, to what extent there's earnestness in broadening the vision and broadening our definition of who we are? How critical do you think that is for going forward?
Yeah. I'm very hopeful. I feel like there has been, not that I feel like, it is written, it has been written in the Guardian newspaper in the UK and all over. I see articles coming out about the renaissance in literature in Trinidad right now, in the Caribbean as a whole, but particularly in Trinidad, there has been sort of a renaissance of female writers coming to the fore, being published internationally, gaining some measure of success, and writing something other than what you would traditionally expect women to write. Writing on hard issues, writing on gritty stuff. And I'm very hopeful that this will open up different perspectives about us, about Trinidad, about the Caribbean, about womanhood in our spaces. And it will, gradually change as we are read more widely. It will gradually change people's views.
Yeah, but as a matter of fact, right now we celebrating two others of the latest ones who have been recognized internationally. You have Lisa Allen Agostini and Nira Mathew getting greater international recognition for the
absolutely great writers. And then you have the Ingrid Passads, and you have the Claire Adams, and you have Alake Pilgrim, and you have, just so many women of Trinidad heritage coming forward and giving new narratives and new perspectives. And I think it's like, I think it might be the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche.
Yeah, Friedrich Nietzsche, yes.
Who said, we have art in order that we do not die of truth. And I feel like that is really what my writing is about, and what the writing in the Caribbean can achieve, that, through art, through getting stories out there, and through we can affect how we see ourselves. Because sometimes some truths are very hard to swallow when you read them in a newspaper.
Yeah. Yes.
We can affect how we see ourselves, and we can also affect the truths that people think they know about us.
Yeah. You've had to come to terms with what some used to use that term to describe us. We wear rose-colored glasses in order to see what we want to see, as opposed to what the reality is.
Sorry, I lost you there. You said
in decades ago, we used to talk about that a lot, that our sort of reach for wearing rose-colored lenses in order to see the world how we want it to be, as opposed to how it really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, all I can say is I'm going to continue to write, and I'm going to continue to promote other Caribbean women writers, and it's time to bring a new perspective, and it's time to just open it up, take off the rose-colored glasses, and let the thing breathe. Let the thing breathe. Let's deal with some of these issues with open discussion, and that's the thing literature can prompt. Literature can prompt more open discussion.
Yeah, and in that way, you think that is a contribution in fixing the world, or
absolutely,
at least in fixing our world.
Absolutely. And I feel satisfied more than anything. You have all the awards, which I'm grateful for. I'll never not be grateful. But the thing that has deeply satisfied me since Pleasant View came out, it has been the messages that I receive from readers, particularly female readers, writing to me, finding me on the internet and writing to me and telling me, oh my God, you wrote my story. Oh my God, I never thought I would see somebody say these things. Oh my gosh, you understand. And people I'm constantly attending book club meetings, and I always say yes, because I like interacting with the readers, and I like hearing, how they have received the book. I have one I have to attend tonight where they tell me, thank you for saying some of these things. So, yeah.
Did you have any concerns about that in the beginning, going into it? What would be the reaction? How would people respond? What kinds of conversations you would inspire?
If I was concerned about it?
Yeah.
Yes. I was concerned about it, because I'm well aware that a good bit of what I'm saying is not palatable to some people, and it certainly isn't pleasant. So I was concerned, not so much for myself, but I have a child who has to live in the world and interact with people in Trinidad, and it's such a small society. But I have been so pleasantly surprised that people of all walks of life, all kinds of different socioeconomic statuses, all of them have come up to me and said, this is accurate. This is how it is.
Yeah.
So you can't quarrel with something that is accurate,
Thank you very much, Celeste Mohammed. Pleasant View, and more to come, much more to come.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
This has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.